Hi, and welcome back to the Partner Starter Institute, our fifth and final module of the series, Funding Partnership Work, New Approaches to Sustainability. My name is Courtney Cintron, Ingenuity's Partner Engagement Specialist, and it has been a sincere pleasure to be your host throughout this virtual series. Each module has been designed to equip arts partners with tools and resources to support equitable, quality programs in Chicago Public Schools in an environment shaped by COVID-19, the economic downturn, and the anti-racism movement. The goal of today's module is to gain an understanding of funding strategies and approaches that can be employed to support the longevity and sustainability of arts organizations and arts partnerships with Chicago Public Schools during a time of uncertainty. Please be sure to take notes and write down any thoughts or questions as we move through today's session. There will be an opportunity to enter those questions into a Google form accompanying these modules. We will do our very best to address your questions at the Partner Starter panel on Friday, August 7th. Joining us today to speak on this topic is Ingenuity's development team, Christopher Chantson and Breana Hernandez. Later in the session, we will also be joined by Ingenuity's Creative Schools Fund team, Cole and Ola Faleti. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Christopher and Breana to get us started. Thank you.
Hello, thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Christopher Chantson, and I'm Ingenuity's Director of Development.
And I'm Breana Hernandez, Ingenuity's Development Manager. We're so glad that you're viewing this module of the Partner Starter Institute, during which we'll talk about ways to help you raise funds to support your important arts education programs for Chicago Public Schools students.
Breana and I comprise Ingenuity's Development Department. Together, we're responsible for securing contributions from individuals and institutions that help make Ingenuity's work possible, including professional learning programs like these. Let's start off with brief introductions about who we are. Breana, would you like to share your background with our viewers?
Sure. I'm definitely one of those volunteers that you never get rid of. My career in fundraising started as a way to give back, and I just never ended up leaving. 10 years later, I've been a part of teams that were raising awareness and funding for the arts, for environmental justice, lung health, family services, and finally, arts education. So for me, growing up in a household where music, dance, and creating were a constant, the arts have always remained at the center of my cultural and personal identity. And as a public school graduate myself, I'm grateful to have personally experienced the impact of school-based arts programs. So joining Ingenuity was a natural calling for me to work towards systemic change that ensures all CPS students have equitable and consistent access to quality arts education, just like I was so fortunate to experience.
Thanks, Breana. Like many fundraisers, I stumbled into the profession. I'm actually a musician by education and went to college hoping that I would end up playing the French horn in an orchestra somewhere, but life obviously had very different plans for me. Over the course of nearly 20 years, I've been grateful to work in fundraising for several important causes, including performing arts, social services, early childhood education, and now arts education. I'm the product of a good arts education, so I'm glad to be advancing Ingenuity's important mission of ensuring that every CPS student has access to the arts.
Before we delve into the main subject of today's conversation, we'd like to establish some context that might be helpful. First, it's important to know that the fundraising information we're going to share is mainly intended for nonprofit arts organizations. We know that for-profit entities are eligible to work for CPS students, but most individuals and private foundations, for example, will only provide contributions or grants to nonprofit organizations. We also recognize that some of you might be new to fundraising in general, so we'll review some basic elements using the donor cycle as our guide.
Second, we're heading into an unprecedented fundraising environment, one that none of us has experienced before. The effects of COVID-19, coupled with the anti-racism movement and the economic downturn, have made it very difficult to predict anything. We also know that the implications of the pandemic haven't yet been fully realized, and that our world as a whole has a long way to go in terms of recovery. We'll share some of our thoughts and aspirations for philanthropy and the fundraising sector writ large, but we also recognize that we're all operating in a time of great uncertainty.
And lastly, we're going to offer some fundraising best practices that have worked for Ingenuity that you might want to consider. But we also recognize that you know your organization and your donors best, so you should implement what you think works best for your audience.
So let's dive in. As we mentioned, we recognize that some of you might be new to fundraising and are unfamiliar with the process of engaging donors to support your organization. We'd like to take some time to walk you through the donor cycle. Essentially, the donor cycle is a series of steps that move potential donors towards making a contribution to your organization and subsequently continuing to strengthen their relationship with you. These steps are applicable to all donors of all types, whether individuals, foundations, or corporations. Of course, every donor is different, so you might need to spend more time on one particular element of the donor cycle than another. Every donor cycle begins with prospecting, basically identifying potential donors to your organization. The most likely potential donors are those who have a connection to your organization and who care about your cause. These could include contacts from your board of directors, attendees at your organization's performances, friends and colleagues, and other prospects that you've researched online, like private foundations that are interested in your arts discipline and in supporting programs for students.
So once you've identified those prospects, we begin the cultivation process. This can take many forms and could vary in length, but it's the process of introducing the potential donor to your organization and helping them see where their financial support would make a difference. Some examples of basic cultivation strategies include a formal presentation of your work, site visits to experience your programs, or even a casual coffee meeting. Regardless, the goal is to start building a relationship and inform them of your organization and its impact to help donors visualize their investment in your mission.
Once the potential donor has had an opportunity to get to know your organization, then you're ready to solicit a gift. It's important to keep the 5 R's in mind for a gift solicitation. The right person, asking the right prospect, for the right project, at the right time, for the right amount. Essentially, the appropriate person in your organization, whether that's you, your staff, or your board member, should be making the request, depending on the connection to the potential donor. Hopefully, as part of your research and cultivation process, you'll have determined what the potential donor is interested in supporting, and you're connecting with that donor's interests. You also want to ensure that you're asking at the right time. For example, has the donor experienced any personal challenges recently that might make it difficult for them to consider your request? And ask for the right amount. Do your research to see the levels at which the potential donor is giving to other organizations, particularly organizations that are of a similar or related cause to yours. So once again, the 5 R's, the right person, asking the right prospect for the right project, at the right time, for the right amount. Once you've made the request, you might need to follow up if you haven't heard a decision yet. Remember to find that balance between being too pushy, but also making sure that your request is being kept top of mind.
Now, assuming that the donor agrees to your request and commits their support, the next step is acknowledgement. Thanking your donor is an important step to helping them feel good about their investment in your organization. This acknowledgement can take many forms, including a written letter, a phone call, or more. You can never thank your donors enough. In fact, some donors consider the lack of acknowledgement to be very personal and even a test for some organizations they're interested in supporting. I once listened to a donor speak about this very tactic. She mentioned she had a really good year and she was looking to make a sizable 6-figure donation to a small to mid-size organization. So she shopped around, and when she identified her top interest, she sent them each a $5 donation and waited to see what happened. Their response or lack thereof was her deciding factor to move forward.
The next step in the cycle is stewardship. Stewardship is the process of keeping your donor informed on the work that their support has helped make possible. This can also take very many forms, such as inviting them to see your students in action in your programs, regular email updates, or an occasional visit or phone call. Donors should not feel that the only time that they're hearing from you is when you want to solicit a gift.
If a donor shows interest, perhaps you might want to consider engaging them more deeply in your work. Perhaps there's an opportunity for volunteering with your organization or introducing them to other programs. Engaging them more deeply in your organization increases the likelihood that they'll renew or even increase their investment in your work. Fundraising is an art form, and no donor is the same. But following these simple steps will help you build a stronger base of supporters who will feel connected with your organization and who will be more likely to invite others to join them in supporting your work.
Even with these steps, we know that we're heading into a very uncertain philanthropic environment, especially with the impacts of COVID-19. We know that the economy has taken a hit and that many nonprofit organizations are struggling. Arts organizations aren't able to generate revenue from tickets to their performances, and school closures have made it really difficult to provide arts education to students. Donations from individuals declined 6% in the first quarter of this year, from January to March, compared with last year. Honestly, I would not be surprised if the decline is even greater in the second quarter comparison. That could potentially add up to about $25 billion in lost revenue for nonprofits if the same pace continues through the rest of 2020. Recent data show that 2/3 of donors will continue to give at the same levels as before, but we don't know if this will hold true, particularly if the economy continues to decline further. What we have seen, though, is that donors will continue to be generous to causes that are important to them. We've also seen funders who have been very responsive to COVID-19 needs and basic human services. Many foundations have stepped up to help support arts organizations that are unable to present to live audiences or work directly in schools. And large, nationally recognized foundations are exploring new funding mechanisms to increase their giving beyond what they normally would. We believe that there is opportunity to find donors. Their environment might just be more competitive, with increasing competition amongst nonprofit organizations and greater needs. Breana, we're starting to see some shifts happening in philanthropy, not only in response to COVID-19, but also the anti-racism movement. What are some of the trends that you're noticing, and what aspirations do you have for philanthropy?
Sure. So generally speaking, we've seen what I would describe as a remarkable increase in compassion and understanding from funders. I think that donors are recognizing the unique times in which we find ourselves and the need to be flexible in the demands that they're placing on nonprofit organizations, and particularly those that are struggling under economic duress. We see donors be more flexible in their proposal or reporting requirements, often extensions on deadlines, potentially release restrictions on program grants, allowing those funds then to be used for general operating support. But I also think that it's important that we, as nonprofit professionals, don't assume any of these things are given. Communication with your donors are key. Where I hope to see continued change is in the ways that funders view themselves as the ways in which they make their grants. This can take different forms, such as incorporating community voices in the grant decision-making process and committing to incorporating racial equity into their strategies in a meaningful and authentic way. This could also mean supporting organizations that are led by people of color, or placing an even stronger emphasis on ensuring that programs being offered are addressing inequalities in our communities. We also recognize that there has and continues to be an uneven power dynamic between funders and grantees. For years, nonprofit organizations have been pleading with funders to adjust the demands of the application processes, program guidelines, and their overall scope of work. So when we learn of funding staff that were previously in our shoes and fully understand these challenges, we believe they have helped in starting to break down those barriers. However, we attribute a great deal of these shifts to nonprofit leaders that use their voice as a platform to share similar concerns with funders and hold them accountable when opportunities could be more equitable. Witnessing this has taught me personally that we have a responsibility as nonprofit fundraisers to adjust and mold the funding-grantee partnership.
Thanks, Breana. So we've shared with you so far the basic steps of fundraising, some contextual information about the philanthropic environment in which we find ourselves, and the ways that we'd like to see philanthropy transform. So with that knowledge, What are some of the ways in which you can help your organization make a stronger case for a potential donor, particularly during these challenging times? Breana, what do you think?
Well, it's very important that you have a clear sense of who you are as an organization and what you're hoping to accomplish through your work and with the students that you want to reach. Focus on what makes sense for your organization and the program's uniqueness. Donors, no matter if it's a challenging time or not, understand that nonprofits rely on their support. So be honest and transparent about your organizational needs and concerns.
I'd also add that it's important to be concise in the way that you describe your work. Remember that donors might not necessarily have the same program expertise that you do. Perhaps try to avoid the jargon that we're sometimes inclined to use, and instead use simple, clear terms to describe your programs. Remain true and authentic to your organization's mission, but help donors see how their interests align with yours. And most importantly, help your donors see how their investment in your organization will make an impact and help them feel good about making that impact.
All right, this brings us to the conclusion of our portion of today's module. Thank you for joining us and for your interest in providing arts education programs to CPS students. We hope that you found the information to be helpful as you embark on securing funding to support your organization in making these important programs possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Christopher and Breana. Now that we've discussed some strategies and approaches to funding that you might consider, let's pivot a bit and talk about how Ingenuity can support arts partnerships within Chicago Public Schools through the Creative Schools Fund, and any updates to the process that you can anticipate in the coming year given the current landscape. Joining us for this conversation is Elizabeth Cole and Ola Faleti of the Creative Schools Fund team.
Thank you, Courtney. Hello, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Cole. I go by Eli. It's good to be here with you today, and I'm very happy to introduce Ola Faleti, who is joining us on the Creative Schools Fund team this year. Ola, can you share a little about yourself?
Sure. Yes, I'm so happy to be here, particularly coming from an organization that is an Ingenuity arts partner. It's really exciting to be stewarding this part of the organization, and I'm excited to meet you all sooner rather than later, I hope.
Definitely. We are really happy to have Ola on the team this year. I have been working with the fund since 2015, and I'm excited to share what we've learned with you and what you can expect this year. So I will just project my screen and turn over to Ola to share the essentials of the Creative Schools Fund.
Absolutely. So it's worth mentioning that all grants are made directly to Chicago Public Schools. Many schools do partner with arts organizations, but the responsibility of actually submitting an application and also receiving the funds purely lies with the school. Grants range up to $15,000. I will say that 15,000 is not a super common number, but depending on the proposal, it's possible. But I would say that most grants are capped around 10,000. And all funds support teacher designed and led arts education programs. The emphasis on teacher designed and led is important. We really want to foster collaboration and foster the customization of curriculum as much as possible so that it's really responsive to the specific needs that teacher students have. Often, though not always, these are conducted with arts organizations, as I mentioned earlier. And also, as I mentioned earlier, while these partners are important, they are not the ones who receive funds, and they are not the ones who actually submit the application. But this next point I cannot emphasize enough, which is that arts organizations must have a vendor number with the city in order to partner on a grant. If arts orgs don't have a vendor number, this can really hold back the process as far as actually getting funds out. It's a process that's not necessarily pain-free. It may take some time. So if you don't already have a vendor number, work with your school as soon as possible to get one. A good time to start is now. A better time would have been yesterday, but I really cannot emphasize how important it is to have a vendor number. And for the most part, funds support programs with direct instruction to students, particularly things such as field trips or also in-school classroom partnerships. But all of this programming has to take place within the confines of a school day. So we do not support any out of school time, but we do support out of school time for teacher planning as far as developing curriculum, supplies and materials, and just anything that will help enhance the actual initiative that is hopefully in the runs for being funded.
Thank you, Ola. Now, of course, we are talking about an unusual year right now, and the policies that govern at least the start of this school year will restrict some of the things that we have typically funded in the past. And so we may not see things like field trips, we may not see things like in-school residencies happening in the same way that we have in the past, and we understand that. And so we want to talk a little bit about what to expect this year and how things might be different because of that. And so we have taken a look over the last several months. Ingenuity has spoken with students and teachers and principals and arts organizations, teaching artists, leaders, and philanthropy to understand across every part of the arts education sector what are the trends that they are seeing, the needs, the assets, and the opportunities, and what can we all do as a sector in order to sustain access for students through this crisis and beyond. We called it the ARC process, the Arts Education Response Collective. And based on the feedback that was shared through that process, we have actually redesigned the strategies for this year. And so beginning very soon, we will start communicating about what schools and arts organizations can expect from the strategies that Ingenuity and its partners will support through the Creative Schools Fund. I can tell you right now that the grant strategies will prioritize flexible implementation models. So knowing that, that arts vendors may not necessarily be in schools in the beginning of the school year, and we don't necessarily know what will happen over the course of the year with COVID-19, and that health and safety is priority in terms of Chicago managing its disease risk, and the Chicago Public Schools managing the health and safety of its staff and students. We are asking that all of the applicants have a lot of flexibility in their implementation, are able to demonstrate how they are able to offer their programming in both remote or in-person formats, and have timelines that will adjust based on what changes may come in the school environment over the course of the year. And so those are the kinds of things that will be very important as we're looking at grants for this year. We also will be thinking about flexibility from us. And so those of you who have worked through our grant process in the past have known it to be a somewhat fixed process where you apply in the summer, decisions are made by December and announced, and then grants are made and programs occur in the spring. And that will not be the case this year. We are thinking that we will have a rolling application and approval process. We will expedite the timing between application and approval and getting the funds into school budgets so that they are able to have more time to implement grants, and schools are able to really time the projects that they want to conduct over the course of the year on the timeline that makes the most sense for them and their students. So all of this is to say that we are trying to exercise the most flexibility we can and asking for flexibility from those that apply so that we can together make sure that students are able to continue to get access to the arts in the way that the fund has always prioritized, but to do so in creative and new ways, which we know we can trust this sector to come forward with creative and adaptable models in order to chart a path through the crisis to get arts to students to every degree possible. I do also want to mention the Creative Schools Fund is a funding partnership. And so Ingenuity supports the grants to schools, but Chicago Public Schools also supports the grants financially, and so does the mayor's office. So it's a three-way funding partnership bringing together public and private funds to support grants directly to schools for arts instruction. So where can you go to find out more? I've listed our names here and contact email, which is CSF, standing for Creative Schools Fund, at ingenuity-inc.org. Please reach out if you have questions. And then here is the Ingenuity website and how you can navigate to find out more from our webpage. So you click the Creative Schools Fund and then just click Apply to the Fund. Right now, it has our grant guidelines from last year. That is a good place to go if you want to find out more about what makes a school eligible, what we've typically granted to in the past, anything else that might be interesting. But do know when you look at that grant guidelines that the strategies themselves will change. And that is where we will post information as soon as it's available in the next several weeks, as well as a link to our application portal where schools can go to apply for the grants. Okay, that is and we will turn back to you, Courtney, with thank you so much for having us to talk about the grants today, and we will look forward to working with all of you in the future.
Excellent. Thank you, Ola and Eli, for talking with us about what we can expect in regards to the Creative Schools Fund this year. That concludes our final Partner Starter module. We hope that the series has been a helpful starting point in preparing for partnerships in the upcoming school year. We've discussed the knowns and unknowns of CPS guidelines, using data to inform equitable partnerships, professional learning in the Arts Ed Response Collective, approaches to financial sustainability, and the Creative Schools Fund. So please join us for our culminating Q&A session on Friday, August 7th at 10 a.m., where speakers from each module will join us to answer any pending questions that you may have. So be sure to enter all of those questions in advance into the accompanying Google Sheets for each module. And thank you again for tuning in, and we will see you soon. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.